Welcome to Two Millennials and Mom, where we bring you engaging conversations and respectful disagreement across the social spectrum.
Injected with the quirks of everyday life.
Grow up as we navigate the complexities of this modern world with all the humor and warmth we can muster.
And the occasional gentle ribbing. We're glad you're here. Happy listening.
Hello, and welcome to Two Millennials and Mom. I'm Callie.
I'm Cole.
I'm Mom. How are y'all today? Good.
Here.
We might have been up a long time, so y'all all ready to go?
I'm
We're
ready.
Going back
What
in
you got
history
for us?
today.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going back in history. We're taking it all the way back to the roots of the American government with a deep dive into the Federalist Paper number 51. Now, I know that might sound like something dusty from a civics textbook, but hang on, because this essay is wild in how relevant it still is. It was written by James Madison in 1788. The Federalist 51 was part of a larger series of essays meant to convince skeptical New Yorkers to get on board with the brand new U.S. Constitution. But this one in particular, it's about how the power should be split up between branches, between people, and between levels of government to keep anyone from getting too powerful. Because let's face it, humans are not angels, and Madison knew it. In this episode, we're breaking down what the founders were thinking, why conflict between government branches is not a flaw, but a feature, and how this whole system was supposed to protect minority voices, even when we don't always see that happening today. Plus, we'll look at how one-party rule in modern politics might be pushing those founding principles to their limits. So, if you've ever wondered why our government was built to argue with itself, or what the heck Madison meant by ambition must be made to counteract ambition, this one's for you.
Sweet. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about this one. I was reading back through 51 last night, and kind of a tangent here, but I will never second guess my use of commas in text messages again. Y'all already know that I'm a big proponent for commas, but I was reading through it last night, and Madison's writing is very eloquent, but there are several times through just this one essay where he's got 7 or 8 commas in one sentence because it's a really long sentence and he's breaking it up. And those commas definitely kind of guide you in the right direction as to the intonation that would be used if you were speaking those sentences as you read them, which I thought made it much more clear. Because if you go and try and find like an audio version of it, it's just this really flat kind of monotone no intonation, whereas I think he's writing it with a significant amount of passion in his words. And so reading it myself made it a whole lot easier to track, which I thought was really interesting and definitely made me feel better about the amount of commas that I use.
Just to support your comma usage. That's funny. I think it's kind of sad because when you're reading that, and like you say, it's very eloquent, it's very passionate, but we don't write or read that anymore. I mean, they have references to things that you and I don't even know, that, which I'm sure came from British rule or influence, but it's just a totally different way
Well,
of
I think it
writing.
really speaks to how well educated James Madison in particular was.
Yeah.
Like I am hunting for ways to fit the word perfidious into my everyday common dialect.
I'm sure you'll figure it out.
I'll figure it.
I'm sure you will. Well, we're going to discuss this, not only the separation of the government, but the need for multiple factions, because I think this is the one thing. So just to lay this out, Callie and I are taking an online Harvard course about government. And here's the thing. I don't think any of us were really taught government basics in school. So unless you're a poli-sci, graduate, I don't think we know this stuff. So this has been really fascinating. And this was just one of the reading exercises that we were supposed to do. And I think the thing that really caught my attention is you want lots of small minorities, and it's not static. But if you have a majority, you don't want the majority to just always make the minority kowtow to whatever they're doing. So if you have multiple minority factions, then those are going to move
Balance the
around.
power.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what it is.
Yes. And so, I mean, it was like my brain just went, oh, we're fighting so hard to keep all of those little minorities out when that was the intention. We need those minorities to really make our government work the way it's supposed to work. So I was like, okay,
Yeah,
we got it.
Once again, the two-party system is quite anti-American.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
well,
anyway.
And again, I think that even if you want to sit here and say, hey, the two-party system is better than a one-party system, okay, cool. But we have gotten too big for our britches again, to where those two parties are so dominant and so big that nobody else has a chance.
And that's to the detriment of the will of the people.
Absolutely it is.
Well, and I think we'll find that those parties are not operating the way they were in. I mean, it doesn't really address political parties, but it does address how those representatives are supposed to be elected and what they're responsible for. And we have definitely moved away from that part. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like if you go through and when you read it, it does directly reference political parties, just in a different term, mentions them as factions. But
Yeah.
I mean, really what he's referring to is political parties. That just wasn't the term for it at the time.
yeah, I guess that's true. I was thinking Whigs and Tories, and that's not really where he goes. And I find it totally fascinating that this was really, so you've got 13 states, colonies that have just, become a republic.
Yeah, they're 12 years into they're 12 years into the Confederacy, and they're saying, "Hey, this isn't quite working how we wanted it to.
Yeah.
We're going to have to restructure." Now James Madison is having to write the people of New York to say, "Hey, I know this restructuring doesn't sound all that appealing to you. Here's why it actually is."
But they'd gone through some things. Like, I thought, and I'd never heard this story before, but there's a story about the debtors in Rhode Island, who were the majority, had decided they'd just print money. And if they could print money, then they'd pay their creditors with that money. But it was worthless, really. And then all of the debtors didn't have anything. They couldn't function. And so it was a disaster. And so they're also addressing part of that. So you've got each state has its own government, and they're trying to find a way to pull everybody together. But again, they're so very conscious. We don't want a tyranny. We don't want what we had in England. This is different, and we want something different. And Cole, I think you're right. I mean, the education here of Madison and even Hamilton, it's just fascinating to see how their minds pulled this together and what they're doing. But this paper, it specifically is written to the state of New York, trying to get New York to come on board and ratify this new constitution that they're building. And this is really the Constitution. It's not the Bill of Rights. It's really addressing the Constitution.
Yeah, this would be pre-Bill of Rights.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, and if I remember right, even after this series of Federalist Papers, they had to present the Bill of Rights to actually get the states to ratify the Constitution, to say, hey, these are like, okay, we've added these additional articles that are rights of the people that are being secured by ratifying these articles. And I was reading through it last night, and at one point, probably about halfway through, it kind of clicked for me. You start to read this Federalist 51, and you're like, man, this really sounds like legalese, kind of, the way he's writing it. And I'm sitting there thinking, and I'm like, oh, that's because our entire legal system is basically founded on the writings of this man and a couple of others. So that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And the thing to remember is the Federalist Papers are what we really go back to legally, reference-wise, time and time and time again, to really clarify what the Constitution was supposed to mean. I mean, they're not what you think of being on, on display in the museum, we the
documents.
people. They're a huge part of what supports the Constitution.
Yeah, they're kind of like, it sounds weird to say it this way because of the way that it's written and how difficult it can be to understand in modern context, but really it is the layman context of what the Constitution intends.
Yes, I agree totally with that. So this is all about checks and balances, the separation of power, the three branches. And I thought it was really interesting. The three branches that he defined are not the three branches that we recognize today completely. He wanted a Congress, but that House part wasn't really defined completely yet. And for the executive, he wanted the executive, but he advised against a vice president. He wanted what they called a privy council, which was a group of scholars, experts that they wanted to come in that would advise the president. And when I first read this, I thought, oh, well, that's his
cabinet.
But it's not really at all.
Well, and I think that there were some very specific kind of prerequisites and requirements of those people, of this privy council. So it's not going and whispering in his ear saying, hey, this is what you need to do, and this is what was going to be best for us. It's all recorded. It's all noted what everybody said and how they advised, so that there is accountability to all of that.
Yeah. It's all on record.
Right.
Yeah. And you kind of think that interesting. And so then the third branch was the judicial, which again, you already have some judges in the state. So this is a level above that. This is where the Supreme Court came from. But I also thought it was really interesting because the idea was that you want them to be separate, but you want them each to have a little bit of overlap so that there's
friction.
Yeah, that's the exact word that I was going to use. There's a little bit of friction there to keep them honest. Yeah. And so, we've been taught that there's three branches of government and they're supposed to be independent. But really, he wanted them to have a little bit of overlap with each other so that they had to have some agreement. They had to have some compromise along the lines.
And work together.
Yes.
Well, I think the actual intent, if you, particularly reading 51, is that they all have very distinct and separate individual wills, and they require each other's consent, but that friction is designed to prevent a concentration of power. Like when he said, ambition must be made to counteract ambition, it is so that, okay, the people in the legislative branch, they, as humans, are incentivized to hunt for power. And that their ambition for more power is a check on the judicial and executive branches, and vice versa. I thought it was really interesting how he talks about the importance of having a department, is the word that he seemed to lean on here, that was an individual will, similar to like having like a singular president. But he talks about the drawbacks of having just the singular will in like a hereditary or like a monarchy type system where, okay, well, now everyone is kind of just at the mercy of this one person. So it's really important to have this one individual will of a singular president as an executive to really kind of enforce things and be a check on the other two, but then also have the separation of that will with the legislative branch to be a check on the president and on the judiciary, and then also have the Supreme Court to be a check on the other two. So they're all really intended to be independent of each other, but they also have to rely on each other to get things done at some point. And so, I mean, he specifically goes in and talks about, that would slow down the process. That is the intent, is for it to slow down the process. So we get frustrated. Oh, Congress can't do anything. Oh, the government can't do anything. It moves so slow. Well, that really was the intent of this structure of government, to prevent a majority from inflicting its will on a minority. unless there is enough of a majority in the people to say, and it's in like the last paragraph or two where he talks about, how did he word it? In the extended Republic of the United States and among the great variety of interests, parties, and sects which it embraces, a coalition of a majority of the whole society could seldom take place on any other principles than those of justice and the general good. So unless it's kind of really what is the best for everything, not everybody's going to be able to get on the same page.
It ain't
And in that
happening.
case, we want those things to get bogged down so that the will of the majority isn't being inflicted improperly on the will of the minority.
Did that kind of make you feel better about how sometimes things are slow and gummy? I mean, I think we do get frustrated with that.
Certainly. And I think it at least makes it make a little bit more sense as to
Yeah.
why that is. And so I don't know if I would say it makes me feel better, but I guess if it makes me feel less bad, then I guess that would be better.
Yeah. Okay, I'll go there with you. So I think the whole thing was that the laws had to control the government as much as they controlled the people. And that's the saying where he said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. I mean, yeah, that's definitely true. So
We got to be realistic here, folks.
And if
Yeah.
if we were governed by angels, we wouldn't need these checks in place. But we're not.
absolutely. Here's another one of the pieces that the members would have as little agency as possible in the appointment of the members of the others.
Just as much as is necessary.
Yeah. So Cole, give me your take on that one, because that one bogged me down a little bit.
Give me what part of it bogged you down?
So how do you see that working right now? Is that where the president appoints judges to the Supreme Court?
And then has to be
And then
confirmed by the legislature?
And that's what you see this process is. But then how does that work with the Senate? Well, and I guess originally the plan was that each state would have representation in the House. And then the House was supposed to elect the senators, right?
So at the time, the state legislatures were intended to essentially appoint both. So you would have 2 senators from each state, so that the Senate as one portion of the legislative branch kind of is a larger concentration of each population. And then you're supposed to have the House of Representatives, which is supposed to be a much more intimate representation, much smaller groups of people. So there were more representatives, but at the time they were essentially being appointed by the state legislatures, which were voted on directly by the people.
I guess that's kind of where I was trying to go, is that the people did not vote for senators. The people did not vote for the president. That came through nomination. I mean, almost like a tier, smaller to smaller. So you started down here with that state representation, and they elected the senators, and then the senators elected the president. And so the people were represented, because the goal there was that in that House, the people had smaller districts so that their representation was all there. I mean, everyone was represented in that House and by those individuals that were elected to the House. So that's where you get the little factions that come together to make that majority that then comes up into, now we're going to elect these people up into the Senate. And then the Senate is going to, and so we've definitely made changes. That's been done by amendments, and it'll be curious to do some research to figure out why that came about and why they made that change. But it is definitely a move from what this recommendation was.
Well, I think it's really important to consider the context of the time. We think of states right now as kind of like minor governments compared to the federal government. But the reason for the Constitution was kind of to achieve a state more similar to what we have now, because prior to this, with the Articles of Confederacy, each of these states is kind of operating as like a little miniature country, a little micro republic. And then all of those republics have kind of banded together And they just have this group that is supposed to be sort of representative of them as a group, but they didn't really have a whole lot of power to enforce anything in any of those individual miniature republics. And so this switch from the Articles of Confederacy to the Constitution, this reason for the Federalist Papers is to justify a larger and stronger federal government, to increase unity, to still provide enough leeway for each of the states to run themselves functionally as individuals, but to also say, hey, we understand that each of these states is going to do that, but at the same time, if we're all going to be a group, we kind of have to figure out a way to make sure that things are fair across the board and that one state isn't doing it in a way so drastically different than another that it's causing problems. Hence your Rhode Island issue with the debtors printing money. They have to say, okay, this is economically detrimental. So if there is a majority in the state of Rhode Island that is allowing this to happen, well, now that could be impacting the economies of other states, because Rhode Island is really, really small geographically. So if they've got creditors outside of Rhode Island, well, now it's affecting the economies of these surrounding states, these other 12 states. So they have to have some way to prevent things like that from happening. But in order to build a federal government that has that much power, they also have all of these other checks and balances in place to try and make sure that it doesn't evolve into a level of tyranny.
Were y'all fascinated?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm fascinated. I'm also, as we were going through it and as we were reading it, I just kind of kept twitching, going, is that happening? Is that what's going on right now? Is that what is happening in our reality right now? And so I kind of sat there going, how did we get here? All of these safeguards have been put in place. Why are we where we are? And so it kind of put things in question for me about minority versus majority and going, is this really what the majority of Americans want? Is this truly a majority, or is this just a loud minority? And trying to figure out where we all kind of fall, and again, how we got here and what's next.
Well, I think really this is an exemplification of James Madison's warnings against a two-party system, because being entrenched in this two-party system for as long as we have, we've kind of desensitized ourselves to it, which has allowed those two parties to operate and develop a system that has allowed them to concentrate power where, okay, you now have a House and Senate that has a conservative leaning or right or Republican leaning majority, which has at this point put judges into place through the executive branch that is also conservative or right leaning to place these Supreme Court judges who are also right leaning. So it is really with the implementation and desensitization, this two-party system has allowed one of those two parties to really exert probably a little bit more control than was originally intended, which is really what James Madison was warning us against for a long, long time.
Right. And that's exactly my fear. You know, you talked about at the very beginning how we don't teach people and how we've never really learned government, like the way that it was intended and the way that it was written. And so I think that this is a much longer play game than the current administration or the last 10 years even, or any of that. And so part of me is kind of going back saying, we know we're not all angels. But where were those safeguards for us to start pointing that out to each other, saying, hey, so-and-so's not being an angel over here. We got to keep him in check. We got to keep an eye on him. And I feel like we've failed to do that. And that has been what has led us to where we are.
I think we've failed to do that representation at that very beginning level. And I'm a little angry because I feel like we've voted people in, and I'm not going to say that we did a good job voting, but we've voted people in who don't really represent me.
People.
Yeah. And
Totally agree.
And so I don't know how to get back to that. I don't know how to come back. I mean, my personal opinion is you stop voting for a platform and you start really voting for the person who does represent your specific interest. And it doesn't matter if they're Democrat or Republican. I want them to be representing what I think. I mean, those representatives are elected by population. So California is going to have more than Rhode Island, or Wyoming, but that it's going to represent California's interest, as varied as that may be, from San Francisco to LA. And so I don't know how to get us back to voting that representation.
Well, I think there are a couple of things at play here. Gerrymandering is a massive issue with our current system of representation. We need more representatives in the House, period. And Madison addresses that explicitly in this text, talking about, okay, the way that this republic is set up, they will only work over a limited surface area geographically. I mean, he explicitly says that. And the United States as a whole is, 15 or 20 times larger than it was at this point when he's writing at least.
At least.
And so, I mean, you're talking about, at the time, it's really just New England and the northern chunk of the South, Virginia and the Carolinas. And now we've stretched across the entire continent, manifest destiny, if you will. But again, the way this is intended is to have a bunch of really little small republics that can intimately represent the people. And I sent you guys that TikTok earlier this week where the guy addressed that fairly well, is that the way that it was intended, there was an article of the Bill of Rights that wasn't ratified that kind of sets the guidelines for determining representation. How many people can be in a district? How many people can one representative truly represent? And the intention was for those groups to be much, much smaller. So what I really think we need is more representatives in the House to have that more intimate level of representation, because now you're in much, much tighter communities. We also need to find a way to check the way that the government is utilizing changing those boundaries and changing those districts to maintain the power that they have. We need some level of ambition to check their ambition.
Well, and I think that we also need to kind of across the board, I think that we need to get it out of our head that this is the only way. And what I mean by that is by voting for my party, whatever party it is, voting for my party is the only option. Otherwise, I lose. And so I think we've gotten too big for our britches. And so we've said, oh, I'm not going to vote for that person. Kind of like Mom said, not just because of the platform, but because that isn't my party. And you're missing out on all of these other things and all of these other facets of representation because you're mad at the other party. And I think that kind of has a trickle down effect into everything. I think that we shouldn't be voting on big, beautiful bills that have 5 million things, little tiny things tucked in. Vote on each
Agreed.
one. Vote on little pieces of it so that we can do it as a foundation that is stacked up rather than as one big blanket statement.
Yeah. When you're doing those multi-bills, you're compromising on everything. So you're not really getting a true, this is what the American people want, because you've compromised everything else to get there. So I agree with that. I also think it was very interesting. He addresses they're elected for this period of time, because I think what he thought would happen is those senators would come in for 6 years and then somebody else would come in. So he doesn't talk about, you can be a senator for the rest of your life. That's never addressed here. That's never recommended here. And so I think that's another thing, is that we need that change. Turnover. That's a great word. We need that turnover, new blood to get in there so that we have better chance of that representation there.
Well, and I think that starts with the diversification of ideas, or kind of starts that snowball effect of diversification of ideas.
More parties.
Yeah, more parties, and not getting so settled into this is the only option and we're never going to be able to do anything. This is this is the way that it works. And, you know, I on a professional level walked out of one industry that was doing a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit here, and walked into an in-house role where I was doing all of the same things, and in an industry that does everything the exact same way that everybody else does. Like, okay, fine. That's what works. Cool. But I would come in and start questioning things. It's like, this doesn't make sense. Why do you do it this way? Well, because that's how we've always done it. And it just kind of, it certainly caused a little bit of a ruckus and an uproar. Well, we don't know how else to do it, and that's how everyone else does it. But that doesn't mean that it's the best way.
No.
That doesn't mean it's the most efficient. That doesn't mean it's the most effective. And it doesn't mean that it's the right way even. And so kind of throwing that wrench into things to say, hey, why is this? What is going on here? Do you think we could do it this way? Maybe we could. Maybe that makes sense. Let's try it. Oh, that was a total bomb. Okay, well, we won't do it that way again. Let's try it this other way. And being open to new ideas and new concepts and new avenues of progress, I think is really helpful. And so that when you start putting in, I mean, you can look at the AOCs of the government and things like that. She threw a whole bunch of wrenches into lots of things. And people were really upset about it. And I think that in a lot of ways, I'm not talking about her politics even specifically, but that upset a lot of people because they had to do more. They had to step up and say, hey, hold on, let me rethink about what I actually believe. Is that what I meant? You know, and I think that is really good. We're being intentional with our thoughts rather than just lazy.
And, you know, to go back to your big, beautiful bill reference, I completely agree. Each of those topics that are thrown into that should be voted on individually. And that's the point. It will take longer. It will be slower.
Yeah.
Again, that's the point, to prevent an oppression by the majority of the minority. And I think a more multi-party system is really exactly what James Madison is referring to at the end of 51, because he's talking about, hey, there are kind of two ways to check this ability of the majority to oppress the minority. And one is one that we see in hereditary and monarchy systems, where it is the will of an individual to inflict his will upon the entire society. The other is to recognize and understand how many individuals are being represented by this government, and that this government has to consider each of them as individuals. And the only way to do that is through intimate representation. And I think that's really, really difficult to do with especially two parties, but even 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. I think we need 50.
Well, and I think that comes with legwork in terms of these people are different than me, and recognizing that and owning that and being okay with that.
Yeah. I don't, and maybe it's just the term. I don't want to see 50 political parties. I guess in reality, I don't want to see any political parties. Here's my take on this, and I'll make it as humorous as I can. So sometimes I'm going to be in the mom party. Sometimes I'm going to be in the redhead party. Sometimes I'm going to be in the tall party. Sometimes I'm going to be in the married party. Sometimes I'm going to be in the college graduate party. I don't want those parties. I want that representation based on what my thoughts are at that point. Okay, I don't want a platform.
I'm tracking with you now, and I have a better understanding of why you're kind of against this political party system. And I think that you're absolutely spot on with what James Madison is saying here in 51 to say, hey, now the development of factions is inevitable. So
sure,
maybe we don't refer to them as political parties. Exactly. They're mobile and they're fluid, and they are designed to represent the people to maintain power for themselves as a faction.
And that's what keeps the majority
in check.
Because that majority is mobile too. It's not always.
It's fluid.
each individual is their own political party.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. But then you can go and look at all of the other ones and say, hey, I relate here on this and here on that and here on this and here on that. And so you may have 14 different political views, but that's okay. And it doesn't have to all be summed up in one of two.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he addresses this quite specifically in one part, but he talks about, like, as a result of these large majorities becoming and turning into factions, how eventually that comes to their own detriment. How, yeah, okay, right now, maybe I am in agreement with Republicans on the majority of issues, but they feel very strongly about this one specific issue that I completely disagree with. Well, now, because I voted for this platform, this party, their will is being imposed against me when I don't think what they're doing is right.
Yes.
Yeah, I just think that in general, it needs to be much more granular. And so we need to start, like I said, building blocks instead of building blankets.
Yes. Yes, 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 yes. I don't know how to do that, but I'm ready to start,
Stop voting for parties.
I mean, but that's what's running. So how do you do that?
There's always independents in every race. There are always other parties.
But I don't know that solves my issue.
So I think that you have to look at it as a little bit more of a long game. And that's the really hard part. You're going to have to make some choices that you're never going to see the fruits of your labor. You're going to have to make some votes and make some calls and make some sacrifices even that you will never see come to fruition.
I think James Madison and the Founding Fathers knew that.
Yeah.
And that's why they put those systems in place, knowing full well that they would never see them come to fruition.
And that sucks and that's hard. And I think that I'm going to go back to
fascinating.
Yeah, but I think that it goes back to the way that we have trained our brains to be so reliant on instant gratification. I want to make this one vote and everything is fixed tomorrow. That isn't reality.
No.
And we don't want it to be. We don't want it to be for any single one person, one party at all. One vote. Like that would be tyranny.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we have to sit here and make those tough calls and have those hard conversations so that we can then make a difference down the line because it all compounds. I mean, like I said, building blocks, not building blankets. We now have to build the blocks one at a time.
So I think the point of that is because we can sit here and talk about this all day long, but what that said to me is I need to get really familiar with my representatives. I need to know, I need them to know what I am thinking.
Yeah.
And what I am supporting. And I need to really push that. And I guess because now they're not electing the Senate, that we're electing the Senate, that I need to do that with my senators as well. I think we talked about this on an earlier podcast that I had a friend who actually told me this. He said, go get involved, write them letters, talk to them. And I didn't hear everything that he was saying to me, but it's not a letter. They need to know my name.
It's an intimate relationship that you're forming.
Yes. And as hard as that may be, I think it's going to be critical.
And that really was the intent of building the House of Representatives, to have that intimate level of representation, to have much smaller districts population-wise, to say, hey, I'm only representing 500 people, but because I'm only representing 500 people, I know each of those individuals, so I know what they as a whole want.
I've heard
and I know that if I don't do what they want, they're not going to let me represent them again.
Well, and more than that, I know what Mecca wants, and I know what Cole wants, and I know what Callie wants. And I know that if I make this choice, Mecca's going to be pissed off, and I can go to her and say, Mecca, you got to see the bigger picture. This is why I did it. This is why I'm doing this. I'm sorry that it upset you. I know that it did. And it does. It requires that much more intimate relationship. Cole and I are both kind of guilty of this. We've talked about this previously. When we go to vote, we sit in the parking lot, we do all of our research looking at everything. It's not enough. We need to be actively involved all year long with every single one of those people to say, hey, I talked to you about this. You chose to ignore me. You chose to send me some form letter instead of hearing me. That isn't all right. That isn't okay. So that when we get into those ballot boxes for whatever election it is, we intimately know all of those people and we're able to accurately hand them our trust.
It should be someone that you know and that knows you. I think you're exactly right. And I think that in that TikTok, he talks about that relationship, how those representatives should be there in their districts for the vast majority of the year, working, understanding, knowing, talking to, helping, understanding the people that they're representing, and not sitting in Washington arguing with each other for more than half the year.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what would happen if all of a sudden we all started reaching out to our local representatives and saying, hey, I want you to know how I feel about this. And next week, I'm going to come back and tell you, this is how I feel about this, and I want you to know it. But if you had an influx, wouldn't it change their attitude?
Yeah. Well,
Hopefully.
Cole said something on the episode for last week about if everybody were 10%, 5%, 1% more self-aware, the difference that would make in everyone. But then at the same time, like kind of on the other hand, I think it takes 5% of the population to rise up to cause a revolution? 5%. And so do I think that everybody should do it? Yeah, absolutely. Am I guilty of not doing it? Yes, absolutely. But if 1% of us would rise up and make a change and start holding people accountable and start forming those intimate relationships, I think it would make a huge difference.
I think I'm more convicted for that after understanding this part than ever before. I mean, I can sit here and say,
it's so hard to conceptualize that without kind of having it laid out in front of you the way Madison does.
Yeah. I'm reading a book right now that it's literally talking about, have you read the Constitution or have you read about the Constitution?
Yeah.
Because those are not the same things. And you are not going to get the intentions. And you can go into bias and all of this, and because we all have it. But reading the actual document itself is not the same thing as reading 100 takes on it.
Yeah. Opinions.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think I'm going to walk away with two things. One is that point about all of those little factions so that the majority can be controlled. So I think that's critical. And in my head, I'm going to say this, and this may get me in trouble, but I'm going to say that means that even if I disagree with you, I still have to allow you to be a different faction. It doesn't take away from what I believe, but I cannot take away from what you believe either. And so I think that's a huge point. The other part is, and I guess I just didn't understand that it was really, the intention really was for there to be conflict within the government to maintain those checks and balances. And so I think I have a different perspective of looking at that now to say, okay, there's a reason for this, and to watch how that plays out.
Yeah, sometimes you have to think about it a little bit harder to understand that there is a reason, and even harder to understand what that reason is. But I mean, your first point, you're talking about the reason for the enshrinement of the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. That freedom of speech and freedom of religion is exactly what you're talking about. The ability to say, hey, you're free to have your own beliefs, but you also have to let everyone else have theirs.
Yeah. It's okay that we disagree.
It's good that we disagree.
I'm going to harken back again to what Cole said in a happiness episode, where he was talking about you can't only ever be happy, because if you're only ever happy, you've never had any kind of friction and frustration. You can't appreciate the good when it is. You
And there's
don't
no
recognize the bad. Yeah, there's no reference point. And I think that the same is true of this. We have to be open to other people's ideas. We have to be open to hearing them out and letting them do their own thing and being different. And that is what that friction of all of this is intended to do. We want you to know what good is because you also know what bad is. We want you to know what freedom is because you also understand tyranny. We want you to recognize why we're upset with each other about this or that or the other.
It's like the nuance of a painting. Without highlights and shadows,
Yes.
there's no depth.
It has to be multidimensional in order for it to shine.
Absolutely.
Flat diamond is just glass.
I like it. And I'm going to just say, I've had a ball with this course. It's taught me so many things. We've had some reading to do for sure,
Yes.
but I would recommend this. Harvard has lots of courses that you can just go online and audit, and they've done a good job. I mean, they've got video content and easy little questions for you to answer and reading.
But they're not
recommended
all
reading.
easy little questions. They're questions that you have to think about, and they're written in ways that you can't just say, oh, I just got that wrong.
Yeah.
How did I interpret that?
Yeah. But it's been fun too. And
really
doing it with you is,
educational.
made it more fun. But I would highly recommend, especially because we've not been taught government, that it.
And I want to touch on that real quick.
Uh-oh.
Because I think what you're saying is exactly right, that we don't touch on government. So I was reading through 51 again last night, and while I was driving and making my dinner, I just threw on like a YouTube playlist, and it's a bunch of like high school AP government teachers talking about 51. They're all 3 minutes long.
Yeah.
I mean, how
We
can you
do
go through
this.
This is what, well, no, but that's kind of the opposite of what I'm saying. You're talking about advanced placement government, and they're covering a topic that's so important in 3 minutes. You can't get the full context. And this is the advanced placement.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
And like, I took AP government in high school, and I remember talking about Federalist 51, but again, like we never actually went through and read the whole thing. We just kind of talked about it and what that context was supposed to mean without actually. This should not be advanced placement government high school. This should be in
Basic.
every history class that we teach to our children.
Yeah.
And so here's my next kind of question. Sorry to kind of throw you under the bus here. When is the last time that you actually thought about any of these Federalist papers?
AP government?
Yeah. Because it's not and I'm right there with you, just for the record. It's not a regular everyday thing. And so I think that we kind of do ourselves a disservice by A, not teaching it, B, not holding ourselves accountable to what it is and keeping it as part of our everyday life, and C, by dumbing it down into 3-minute highlights.
Every news reporter on TV should be referencing the Federalist Papers regularly. Especially if they're talking about anything constitution-wise. One of the notes that I left here is, I think being a constitutional scholar would be absolutely fascinating, just because of all of the additional reference materials that you have there with the Federalist Papers, with the journals of the Founding Fathers talking about what their intent was. I think it would be absolutely fascinating. But again, this is something that, I mean, we're witnessing the consequences of not paying attention to this happen in real time in our government right now. And this is what we should be talking about. Hey, you say that what you're doing is constitutional, but if you go back and you read all of these references, these contextualizations of that document, you're doing it wrong. And it's clear as day.
Wouldn't that be fascinating too if we addressed all of these things not as, well, you're a fascist or you're a socialist, but this is not what our Constitution says. That's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. And I think it has a lot more conviction.
Yeah.
Yes.
It needs to be part of our everyday rather than one course in high school.
For the smallest subset. I mean, what portion of the population is taking AP government?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and Cole, I think that you make a really good point talking about reporters who are covering things should be referencing these things, because I think that again, I think that is them doing the rest of us a disservice. Hey, you heard about this in AP government. This is it in real life. There's always that thing about, when am I ever going to need to know how to figure out the sides of a triangle in real life? I have a calculator, like all of these things. This is the real world application. This is it being applied to your real life every single day in major ways. This is why it's important. And so I think that you're right. I think that these reporters and these journalists should be going back and referencing these things and bringing it up and talking about them, saying, hey, let's talk about this. What does this mean? And this doesn't really suit my agenda, but we're, again, looking at the much bigger picture, the long game, rather than this is what's best for me and who cares?
Well, and here's the thing. If you disagree with Madison's sentiment on one of these topics, say that.
Yeah.
And then someone else, that's kind of the whole point of the free market of ideas, the enshrinement of the First Amendment, is for me to say, hey, I don't think he's right here. And someone else to come in and say, I do think he's right, and here's why.
This is what this was.
Yes.
This is exactly what it was, hey, New York, I want to tell you how.
You're screwing this up.
Yeah.
Well, I want to contextualize this for you so you understand why it's set up this way. I understand that it's different and it's scary and it's hard, but here's why we're setting it up this way. Here's why it makes sense. Here's why we've structured it this way. And it's supposed to be for your benefit.
Yeah.
But
and
if you don't
have a say
read
in
it and understand, yeah, exactly. You're supposed to have a say in it. Yeah, I 100% agree.
Okay. Anything else,
Man,
you guys?
who would have thought? All it took was reading a couple paragraphs of James Madison, and now we're all on the same page politically. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now that's a funny thought. Okay. Y'all want to talk about our weird thought that we had this week?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm down.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to go back to 1996 with Tim the Toolman Taylor.
So there has been a whole resurgence of a specific episode from Tool Time that has
I have to
taken the
say,
internet
I remember sitting there watching it.
I
thought
I
it was
don't remember
poignant.
this episode,
I don't
but I went
remember
and
this
watched it
episode.
last night.
Well,
and
you were little.
That's true. I was 3 when this episode aired, but I went back and watched that episode last night. And I didn't realize how much I missed Home Improvement. It's hilarious.
Yeah, he's funny.
They're all funny. She's funny. The kids are funny.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
funny.
just really well written.
So the weird thought about it is how at the time it would have been perceived as him being a great dad. Hey, he's teaching his sons. He's being responsible. He's a good guy. This is a man to kind of emulate. And the specific episode and scenes that the internet is kind of having a whole moment with is about a conversation between his oldest son, Brad, and his girlfriend at the time, Angela. So something is said and Brad says to his girlfriend, he's like, hey, make me a sandwich. And she's like, okay, cool. And Tim, the dad's like, what? And Brad's like, oh, do you want her to make you a sandwich too? And he's like, absolutely not. And he's like, what? Come on, Dad. She's just making sandwiches. It's just a sandwich.
She doesn't mind.
And she doesn't mind. And so the whole thing kind of starts there. And then Brad and Tim excuse themselves. And he's like, that wasn't cool. You shouldn't have done this. And Brad's like, well, but she was fine with it. Like, she enjoys doing this. She enjoys doing these things. And Tim goes into this spiel about sometimes girls do that because they're afraid that if they don't do stuff like that, that men won't like them. And so they go into this whole kind of argument, and he's like, well, Mom is good about doing stuff for you. And he's like, but that's not the point. I love your mom because she's a strong woman. And even when she gives me a hard time, like, they're talking about that friction, that is creating that friction that we talked about earlier. And so eventually Brad comes around and he's like, wait, I don't want her to feel like she has to do these things for me. And so he's like, no. I don't need you to do things that I can do for myself. I need to do it for myself.
And you see this kid grow up right in front of your eyes because he becomes aware of how his actions affect someone else.
Yeah.
Becomes a little bit more of a real man.
Yeah.
But
And
today,
so he's a good dad and it was a good lesson and all of these things. But today, because of how divided our society is and because of how the pendulum has separated us so much, today he would be considered a woke, soft leftist. He's not a good dad anymore.
To me, I think that is
Cop out.
an absurd take.
Yeah.
To be perfectly honest with you, one, I don't think very many people who are aligned with the right would say that that's woke. When you go and watch that full episode and you take it in full context, I don't think there are very many people who would say that's woke. There are some.
Full context? You want us to look at full context, not a clip, and make our judgment based on a clip?
Yeah.
Wow, you're weird.
Sorry, I like to understand things. My bad. But no, I mean, I wrote a little bit about this because when I watched it last night, I went and first I read the article, and on that TikTok clip, there's only 1,500 comments. And yeah, a lot of them are saying the exact same thing. Oh, this would be called woke today. This would be called woke today. But again, it's not taking the story in full context, because the mom is, throughout the entire series, a very strong, independent woman who is very much a guiding hand in the family to say, hey, we have to raise our boys right. And Tim is a guy. And so if she gets upset about something, he's not very good at communicating with her about it.
What?
Shocker, I know. But at the same time, this episode does a really great job of showing the nuance of, hey, I'm not really good at communicating this with you, but I understand where you're coming from. And I want to do things, and I want to be considerate of how you feel and how you think and what you think is right, even if I'm not good at talking about it to you. And so being pro-woman isn't woke, but being pro-woman doesn't mean that you have to be anti-man. Two good things are possible to exist at the same time, and those two things can exist together. It's also fair to acknowledge that those two things are different. And I think the take of saying, oh, you respect your wife, you must be a libtard, is bonkers.
Yeah, bogus.
I think if you are on the left and you think that's how even a plurality of people on the right think, I think you don't understand the right. And if you're on the right and that's how you feel, you think having respect for your wife is woke, I think you're an idiot.
Is that how you really feel?
Yeah. I mean, it just absolutely boggles my mind. And I think it's even funnier that the article that I saw came from BuzzFeed, which on all sides is given a left bias all the way. Not leans left, but a left all the way. I think it's really funny that they are calling out and pointing to Tim Allen, who is notorious in Hollywood for being conservative, and saying that,
America's dad.
Yeah, this video from 30 years ago, his party would call him woke. And I'm just like, one, I don't really think so. And two, that's not what woke is.
Wait, hold on just a second.
At least that's not the pejorative use of woke by the right, in my opinion.
You think some random media service source is inflaming things? I don't think they're allowed to do that, Cole.
Fair point.
It was fascinating, and it has certainly gotten us all excited about going back and watching Tool Time, like Cole said, 30 years later.
Yeah. I didn't even know, Cole, that you could go back and watch Tool Time.
It's on all of them.
Everything that is recorded is on the internet, basically. You can go watch any TV show that's ever existed on the planet, essentially.
Welcome to 2025.
Yeah.
Shut up.
I wrote one more just kind of little comment there. I would say that our dad is probably the only person out of the four of us that I would say is more conservative than me. And I think he has a tremendous amount of respect for you, Mom. Do you think he would watch that episode and think it was woke?
Absolutely not. Not in any capacity.
I think so, too.
I think that he would see that as a father teaching a son how to be respectful.
How to have a partner.
And how to have a partner and how to be aware, and that it's, the partner. That's a great word for it. Yeah, no. I think he would die laughing if you told him that was woke. He would look at you and go, "What are you talking
You're an
about?"
idiot.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
He'd probably
So-
say it nicer than me, but.
Depends on who he was talking to. Yeah.
Okay, so I didn't read our good news story for this week. Fill me in on this.
Well, I loved this story. Riley is in, where's she at, Cal?
Rhode Island, and then there's another one in New Jersey.
Rhode Island, and had a child, and stayed at home for a little while, worked from home a little while, and realized how little association she had with anybody else. And she wanted to be a good mom. She wanted to keep working, but you're trying to be a mom. So she went in and developed the Haven Collection. It's a concept where you have facilities that you can actually work from, but that same facility has a certified daycare. They also have a gym. And so you can come to that place with your child, and you can work, and you can spend time with your child, and you can get your workout in, and you can associate with other parents who are in that same time of life and build a community together. And so she's actually built these facilities for this purpose, and I think they're franchising them now. And I just was like, that's
such
greatest
a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So that's like the perfect way to conceptualize and franchise the phrase, it takes a village.
Takes a village.
Yes. And so
Yes.
I fell in love. I just fell in love with this story.
Yeah. So a co-working space, a fully licensed daycare facility, and an opportunity to be around other people, like Mom said, a gym and other people in your same stage of life. Why didn't
with
we
your
think
children
of that?
close enough that you could spend time with them? You could sit down and have lunch. You could sit down and play with your kid during the day. You're right. It's a village. She's conceptualized a village and is making it work. And kudos to her.
Well, I think that's a great example of what we've been talking about today, is taking these small groups of people and building some reason for commonality between them. So yeah, maybe you live in New York and you've got this city with 8 or 9 million people, I think. Well, now you have this one center where everybody from this neighborhood can meet with their kids, and they can work remotely from this place, and they can all share this community space and interact with each other and talk to each other and say, hey, this is how I think about this, and this is how I feel about this. And okay, maybe we feel a little bit differently, but we can talk to each other at least.
Yeah.
Our kids can still be friends.
Yeah. So
I think that's great.
Boo, I'm going to ask you both this question. Build your village. What 3 components would be in your village if you were going to?
What do you
hers
mean?
is centered around kids and parents who have kids who need something else in their lives. Can you build your own village?
I think I kind of have built my own little village.
So
I don't know
Kelly,
that I've done the best job of it, but I think I have a relatively small group of friends that we would consider ourselves a community. And if we need help, we can help each other out. And I think that's kind of a...
No, I'm really thinking more along the lines of if you wanted to build a franchise like she did. So she started with, I'm a new mom, I work from home, and I want to work out. And so that's how she built this community. That's what I'm saying. What 3 pieces would you want to build your franchise on? I mean, mine could be empty nesters that work from home who have retired husbands. Maybe we have to throw a therapist in there too. What 3 components would be your business model for building your own community?
I think for me, I think that it would require, I don't want to call it working out, because I'm never going to go to a gym. I hate a gym all day long. But I would,
activity.
Yeah, some kind
Have
of
a walking club.
activity. Yeah, a walking club, a place to work, because I have worked from home for a really long time, and it's fine, but it's lonely. And so I would like to have that kind of co-working space that you can go over and have buddies and say, hey, I know you're in a totally different industry. Can I run this by you really quick? Just for a second perspective. So I would like to have that co-working space. And I would also, as goofy as this sounds, I would like for there to be an element of laughter in there. So I like what you said about a therapist, because emotional intelligence is only beneficial to all of us. But I think that there would need to be a place to laugh, and whatever that is and means. I don't know if that is as simple as a bar so that you can kind of relax and hang out for a bit, or something stupid like a Velcro wall, because why not? I mean, that would just be silly.
That's a great idea.
Just gives you an opportunity to laugh and kind of relax a little bit and take a breath and say, okay.
So,
We can keep
Cal,
going.
yours could be a walking track with little cubicles or offices in the center with Velcro walls around you.
I love it.
Let's build it.
I love it.
Boo?
Yeah, I like the idea of maybe not a bar, but like a lounge. Just kind of a gathering area that's comfortable and cozy.
Last week when we talked about, what did they call them? Where you put your phone away?
No phone zones.
Yeah.
A no phone zone. So yeah, like a lounge area. But what I would probably want would be like a lounge area that's kind of outside, maybe around like a small stocked fishing pond, and have offices. And I really like the idea of a track. So maybe like a walking track that goes past all of the workstations. So, hey, I'm going to go for a walk on my break, and I met this guy that is on the cubicles on the other side of the track. And I think that track goes around the fishing pond. So you can check in with the guys who are fishing. Hey, you catch anything today? You can check in with your buddy who's in the cubicles on the other side of the track. And then you kind of just have a lounge area maybe on one end where everybody can just kind of gather and hang out. Maybe there's a fire pit, just a kind of a communal space to hang out after work for a little while.
Yeah.
You could do smoothies at your bars. So you could do smoothies in the morning and cocktails or mocktails in the afternoon, so you don't get in trouble at work. I just want to tell you, your dad had a very strong disagreement with you guys over the alcohol thing, lubricating
Social
life.
lubricant.
He was like, I disagree on this completely. And I just got so tickled at him. So, well, I think we have
what
three.
exactly was it that he disagreed with? That it acts as a social lubricant, or that we should utilize it as
That
one?
we should utilize it, that we should promote it. He was,
Well, he can be in his own faction, and I'm going to be in the faction over here that utilizes it. And that's
pretty
fine.
much, that's pretty much.
But I think what he's saying is fair, and I don't think that utilizing it as a social lubricant is the right thing for everyone.
Correct. I agree.
But I do think that some people, that it's reasonable to utilize it that way.
And I did try to say, we're not saying go get drunk. We're saying a drink or two loosens you up and allows you to be a little bit freer. And he was like, no.
And I don't think it's something that you should be dependent on forever, but maybe
True.
as getting your foot in the door, relaxing just to give yourself a little bit of liquid courage the first time or two.
Yeah.
Isn't a bad
I
thing.
mean,
It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be the end of the world. It doesn't have to be this terrible thing.
He disagrees with you. So
And that's fair, as is his right.
he's in his own little thing there, but he disagrees with you. But anyway, so I think we have 3 business plans to work on now, because I think all of those would be fun. I mean, wouldn't you love to work from home in one of those? I mean, I would like the fish pond.
I mean, let me just say this. And you could bring your retired husband there while you worked, and he could fish.
Yeah.
But let me just say this. Co-working spaces really took off right before COVID and then kind of died afterwards. So maybe this is not our most intelligent business plan. We might have some
It's
more work to do.
working for Britt Riley.
It is. And I'm thrilled for her. That's awesome.
thrilled
I'm not
for
saying
her.
it won't work everywhere. I'm just saying maybe don't put all your eggs in the basket.
I don't know.
Maybe you do it as part of an apartment complex.
That'd be
it's
cool.
They're amenities for a community of people that are living near each other. I think that makes it a little bit more reasonable. So you have an opportunity. Sure, they have a co-working space that you can use if you want to. You can also work from your apartment.
Yeah. It sounds like a really great neighborhood to me. Yeah.
Interesting. So, had fun talking to you guys today.
Yeah, it's been lovely.
Love
Go
you
be
guys.
nice to your spouse or significant other. Don't make them do everything for you.
Be respectful and considerate of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
and expect them to do the same for you.
Go
And I
read
guess
up on
go
your.
watch some Tool Time.
Yeah.
Go watch some Tool Time and go read the Federalist Papers.
Yeah. Go read up on your
Yeah.
government.
One at a time. There's a lot in there.
Love you
Love you
guys.
guys.
Bye.